Hello everyone. In the 1990s there was this completely brilliant comic book called Invisibles, written by this mad Scotsman called Grant Morrison. And a couple of issues in, one of the main characters is this old guy called Tom of Bedlam. And Tom of Bedlam's a wino and a chaos magician and a holy fool. And he's beating up this teenage arsonist called Dane McGowan, who's going to be the new Maitreya Buddha, but that's not important for our purposes right here today. Suffice to say, there's this moment, though, where Tom of Bedlam is actually trying to pound some kind of higher consciousness into this kind of teenager, and he's flinging him around the Thames embankment. And there's a moment as he does so where he bellows this at him. He says, "Your head's like mine, like all our heads, big enough to contain every god and devil there ever was. Big enough to hold the weight of oceans and the turning stars. Whole universes fit in there. But what do we choose to keep in this miraculous cabinet? Little broken things, sad trinkets that we play with over and over. The world turns our key and we play the same little tune again and again, and we think that tune's all we are." That's about as close as I'm going to get to New Age philosophy with you this afternoon, I promise. Today, instead, I'm going to talk about curiosity and mystery and how I think both those things work particularly well in the medium of radio. And I'm also going to play you some fragments of audio from my radio program. And these are moments where people are telling true stories that take us close to what are, for me at least, some of the most bewildering mysteries of life, the universe, and everything. And so in the spirit of radio, there'll be no images, just text and voices. And when you hear those voices, please feel free to close your eyes and just try and fill your head with what's happening. Okay, 1982. I was in the first year of an arts degree at ANU in Canberra. I had just moved there. I really didn't know many people at all. I was really lonely, but that didn't bother me so much. But the economy had tanked. I didn't expect to be able to get a job once I left uni, and the world was on the brink of nuclear annihilation. And there was a rumour going around Canberra at the time that the Deakin Telephone Exchange would be a Soviet nuclear target. And so had there been an exchange of weapons, then we'd all be vaporised. And that was the comforting thought a young man had in Canberra in the early 80s. The sole comforting thought. And I also had spots and found it hard to talk to girls. It wasn't good. So I was hanging out in the Chifley Library at ANU quite a lot because I really didn't know many people. I had nothing else to do between lessons. And I think I'd been in there just about all day. And I had this kind of dreamy moment at the end of the day where I looked across at all the books that were there in rows. I was alone in the library, and I realised there was no way I would ever get to read all the books in there. And in fact, there was no way I'd ever get anywhere close to the bottom of all the interesting things that there are in the world. There was no way I could barely scratch the surface. The world had an embarrassment of riches when it came to finding out things and discovering things. And I found that a strangely calming thought. And I think that thought has kept me protected somewhat from ennui and depression over the years. I don't think I've ever been depressed. I've been gloomy, yes, and melancholic at times, but I've been fortunate to have been spared that kind of grinding, debilitating, corrosive depression that I've seen friends struggle with. I think that thought about curiosity has helped keep me relatively happy and sane. I mean, the world is so fucking interesting, and I don't see how you can be indifferent to that. After uni, I went into comedy, after that into TV, and then into radio in 2005. And I wish I'd gotten into radio much sooner than that, because radio is such a beautiful medium, and you consume it so differently from TV. I mean, most of the time when we watch TV, it blares at you across the room, and you sit there in your underpants on the couch with the remote going, nah, oh, yeah, nah, like that. Radio is different. Radio doesn't blare at you across a space at all. It seems to travel up your spine and arrive in the middle of your head, and it's an unusually persuasive medium for all those reasons. It's more like a personal voice that just seems to sprout from your head. And you listen while your subconscious mind is doing other things, taking care of stuff like driving the car, walking the dog, or vacuuming the cat's bedroom, whatever. So shortly after starting in ABC Radio, I was very lucky to be offered a job presenting an hour-long, long-format interview program called Conversations. And at that time, the conventional wisdom in radio was that no interview should last longer than 7 minutes, because that was the absolute limit of the audience's attention span in radio. That's what I was told. So therefore, to be offered one guest over a whole hour is both a privilege and a serious challenge. And to make it work, I do try to channel my inner 8-year-old, as Carl says, the 8-year-old that goes around saying, why all the time. And I only ever bring on guests now that I feel authentically curious about. And this is a matter of sheer practicality. Early on in my program, I brought guests on who I thought I wasn't that interested, but I thought I ought to have them on. And listening back to those shows is so painfully embarrassing now. It's just horrible. I sound really shrill and hysterical because I'm trying to convince myself that this is as interesting as anyone. I'd actually kind of like to wipe them off the whole database if I could. But I think if you're not authentically curious, it's an insult to your guest and to your listeners as well. But if you are authentically curious, then radio makes it really easy to infect your listeners with your own curiosity, like a virus, even on a subject that your listener might not be particularly interested in to begin with. And the force of your curiosity can really bring people to life. And that's true not just for the radio, but for social situations as well. 2011, I went to the United States and I interviewed Ira Glass, who is the presenter of This American Life. For people who might not be familiar with this, this is a beautiful show. It's perhaps the most popular public radio show in the world. And Ira had this to say about the power of curiosity.
Do you have any kind of special approach to those people who are never been on the radio before, who are essentially unknown to the general public?
I mean, mainly we're just curious. Like I feel like the power of someone else's curiosity about you is a really magnetic force. But if you think about like how often during your day does somebody actually care about what you have to say? Like, you know what I mean? Like I work with people who I really love, and you know, I'm married to somebody who I feel like we've got a great marriage and I adore her. But like the number of minutes where somebody wants to hear me talk about my feelings about any subject, I feel like is between like 3 and 7. I say it's like, you know what I mean? Like if I can get
that's
to
a great
7,
marriage, may I say too. 3 and 7. That's
seriously,
excellent.
like if you can get 3 minutes in of just like each of you expressing your feelings to each other in a day. Right? Like that's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, and so the notion that somebody would be like interested in you, like, and asking you questions about yourself for an hour, you know, like that's just like that's an incredibly powerful human force. Like, when does that happen to you? Except when somebody wants to bang you, or you know, or it's the police. You know what I mean? Like when does anybody get that interested in you? And so I feel like most people, I think chemically, we're built to. It's hard not to respond to that. That's actually your most powerful tool.
Right at the beginning there, Ira says, mostly we're just curious. And when he said that, I had to restrain myself from going, yes, I feel the same way too, yes, because it just would have been a bit nerdy and fanboyish. But I find I'm curiously drawn towards the same set of mysteries over the past however many years I've been doing the program, the same mysteries with my guests. And these are mysteries because you can't ever get proper answers to them. Everyone sort of creeps around the edges of them. But just running at them, you get some really interesting things coming into the program. And there are 4 of these central mysteries. And the first of them is, who are we, really? Are we just the sum total of our memories? The second one is, who are our parents? Do we know who they are? The third one is, what was life like before we were born? And the final one is, what happens when we die? I'm so fascinated with the question of identity, like who are we anyway, that intersection between identity and memory. A woman called Robin Pratt came on the program last year, and Robin is the first person I've ever met who has ever suffered from complete and total amnesia. Robin was in Belgium. She'd gone into hospital for a routine operation and had an allergic reaction to the anaesthetic, which wiped her memory clean. That meant her husband was a stranger to her. She didn't recognise any members of her family. And when she woke up in her hospital bed, she didn't even know who she was.
Did you have any idea of what you looked like?
No. You have no sense of who you are, where you are the people around you who they say they are.
The thought must have occurred to you you were part of some kind of strange conspiracy.
Well, I didn't know what a conspiracy was, you see. I didn't know.
Really? It wasn't even that?
No, you don't. You don't know.
What you don't know?
No. You feel drawn towards these people that you think they're good people. They're wanting to help me. So this must be the right thing.
Can you see by all my misplaced assumptions here, Robin, how interesting it is to have to rethink everything from first principles?
No, it's true.
When did your partner Brian start telling you who you were and about your life?
the first time he brought the boys in, I think, was 4 days after I'd come out of surgery.
And what did you think when you were told you had 2 sons?
I was trying, I mean, that's a big thing, obviously to have two, and I'm pushing myself to, I must remember having children. But I didn't, I couldn't remember.
And what happened when your sons walked in?
I didn't remember them.
Robin only ever got fragments of her old memories back. And so her husband had to patiently reintroduce her to her old life and to her old self. And the thought of that just completely blows my mind. I mean, the whole marriage issue alone. I mean, you meet someone, you fall in love, you have that crazy romantic love, get it on 3 times a night period, which is fantastic and exciting, and then that settles it down over time into the kind of comfortable rhythms of partnership or married life. And then bang, one day, one person wakes up and all the memories have been wiped. And so then you're suddenly fascinating strangers once again, with a chemical attraction to one another. I mean, that's so cool. That's rather lovely, actually. Robin discovered that prior to the operation, she had been a really super high-powered businesswoman traveling all over the world and had to completely relearn what it was in the business she did. But she was able to do that reasonably quickly, and she's been able to resume her old life in a kind of a way. But I couldn't help wondering if she thinks that, like I said, she's the victim of some strange conspiracy where she has to take on board everything and everyone around her says about her old life. And when she told me that story, I felt really particularly sorry for her sons, who had to walk into that hospital room and see their mother and see her not know who they are. And if she has no memory of them, can she still be their mother? And that leads me to the second great mystery I keep returning to, which is, who are our parents anyway? Paul Carter. Paul Carter is a former oil rig worker. He's the author of a fantastically hilarious book called Don't Tell Mum I Work on the Rigs. She Thinks I'm a Piano Player in a Whorehouse. Paul Carter, brilliant raconteur. He came on the program not long after his father had died. His father had been an RAF pilot. Paul didn't like him as a man, as a human being. As a father, Paul said he had been psychopathic and cruel, so much so that he and his mother escaped him and moved to Australia to get away from him. Anyway, years went by, his father was on his deathbed. Paul flew to be with him on his deathbed, held his hand. Then, after his father finally passed away, he got up, walked out of the room, and walked into his father's study. His father's study was a place that he'd always been forbidden to enter.
As a boy, obviously, I was never allowed to touch his things, ever. And so I'm sat at this big oak desk, and I'm 8 years old again, and I'm terrified. And I thought, hang on a minute, I'm a middle-aged man. So I pull the drawer out in my little pissy-ass act of defiance and upend it on the desk, and taped to the bottom of the drawer is a swipe card for a storage facility right in the middle of Cheltenham. And I said, what's this? And nobody knew. So I went down there and found this 12-by-6 concrete room with lots of shelving, highly organized boxes, and a 40-watt light bulb, and started digging around in there, and I found lots of stuff, furniture and art, and a box full of 20-year-old copies of the Radio Times. And rattling around in the bottom was something loose, which I pulled out, and I initially thought it was a policeman's truncheon.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't. It turned, well, I took a long, hard look at it and realized it was metal, and there was a hole in one end, and I thought, my God, this is a suppressor for a weapon, a silencer. And there was a cap on the end, and I thought that would be to protect the threads when you screw it onto the muzzle. But it wasn't. When I rotated the cap, there was a bolt, there was a receiver, there was a mechanism in there, and a small ejection port, and I realized that it was a weapon. And so I upended the box, and I found the magazine that doubled as a pistol grip with a little button on the top. And then immediately after that, I find a couple of 100 rounds of subsonic ammunition.
What does that mean, that it's subsonic?
Suppressed weapons fire rounds that don't break the sound barrier when they exit the muzzle, so there's not that loud crack. So it keeps it as quiet as possible, which lowers the range for the weapon, but it's incredibly quiet.
What were you thinking as you studied this gun that sounds to me a lot like an assassin's weapon?
It's exactly what it is. I was excited and immediately loaded it and started shooting it at Radio Times magazines. I also found a commendation from Dennis Healey, who was the Secretary of the State of Defence at the time, for service to Britain that no one knew about. And I found papers and other things that painted an entirely different picture of my father.
That's how Paul Carter discovered that his father had been a British spy and an assassin. I've spoken to so many people who've gone chasing after their mum or their dad, and usually it is the dad actually, and they come to a point where they say, I thought all my life my father was this man, but he turned out to be a completely different human being, sometimes better, sometimes worse. And just think for a moment, if your mother or father had passed away and you were told there's this swipe card for some storage thing somewhere out of town, and you knew in there was evidence of a whole room full of stuff about a secret life that your parents had, would you want to go through it? Would you want to rummage through that secret life? I don't know. I think there's a part of our parents that will always remain terra incognita to us, and a part of us which will remain so to our children as well. And that brings me to the third great mystery, which is an extension of the second, which is, what was the world like before I was born? Now, I long to understand what life was like before I was born. Decades, centuries ago, I love history for this reason, because it's a form of time travel. Some of my favourite guests on the program have been very, very old people who nonetheless retain lucid memories of their childhood. And the very best person I spoke to for this was Angela Lansbury. Murder, She Wrote, Angela Lansbury. As in Manchurian Candidate, Angela Lansbury, going all the way back to Gaslight in my top 10 films. She was in her late 80s when she came on the program, born in the mid-1920s in Maida Vale in England, and still retained this beautiful, lucid sense memory of London in the 1920s.
I remember a good deal of that time, even though I was a little baby, I suppose. I think from the time I was 6 months old, I was starting to be aware of where I was. I remember lying in my pram and hearing all the various street calls and the sounds of London in the 1920s.
Oh, what sort of sounds? What sort of sounds do you remember?
Sounds of the coal man, all of the people who delivered stuff to the doors, to the kitchens of those houses. The coal man had a call, coal, and you'd hear it off way down the street. Same way you'd hear the clip-clop of the horse-drawn milk trucks which came along and delivered milk in those funny little baskets. But all of this was going on. But I remembered it, and it sort of registered with me and remained in my mind, as it has till this very day, as I'm telling you. So all of that has remained in my being, in my mind, in my head somewhere. And it only takes a question like yours to bring it out. There you are.
Television is incapable of painting such beautiful pictures. Then there's the mystery of death, what happens when we die. It wasn't until Jill Hicks came on the program that I realised that death had a voice. Jill Hicks is an Australian woman who was living in London in 2005, got up one morning to go to work in May, had a horrible argument, as in the kind of we're breaking up the relationship argument with her boyfriend, which made her late for work, which means she missed her usual train, which meant she had to get on the Piccadilly line, and she got on the train at the Piccadilly line at King's Cross, and as she got on the train at King's Cross, standing next to her was a man called Jermaine Limsey, who had changed his name to Abdullah Shaheen Jamal. He had a backpack, and in the backpack was a bomb.
Do you recall the detonation? Do you recall any sound or light or anything?
Nothing. It's just, it's even quicker than a draw of the breath. It was just, and suddenly it was just black, completely black.
What did you think was happening to you?
I thought I was dead. I thought I'd had a heart attack. And of course we don't know what dead is. So I thought, this is dead. I'm dead. And it was only when I could hear so I lost quite a lot of my hearing. I've lost one eardrum and I have half an eardrum left. But I could hear screams, and I thought initially people are screaming at me because I've just died. And then I thought, no, there's too many screams for that. We're all in this together.
What you're saying to me reminds me that we know with hindsight what happened, but of course you couldn't.
I had no idea. I didn't even know it was a bomb till I was in hospital, till I woke up.
So you had this feeling then of being like suspended or falling, or?
It's like, absolutely like falling. It's like falling in or being cushioned by thick black tar. And that's what to me felt like facing an abyss.
I didn't know until that moment that the sound of a bomb going off is That's what I found out from Jill in that moment. Jill's legs were ruined. Someone lifted her up onto one of the bench seats where she had waited patiently for an hour to be rescued. And in that hour, she crept right up to death.
There was a girl across saying, you know, what's your name and what do you do, and trying to keep each other awake. And I ended up having to say, I need to stop talking now. I'll let you all know that I'm still here, but I'm going to conserve all the energy and the breath. And I focused on my watch and just stared into my watch.
You said that there were two voices in your head talking to you, addressing you. What were they saying?
My impression of that is that I was being offered a choice. That choice was quite difficult to make because death's voice was absolutely beautiful, and it was female, and it was calm, and it was saying to me, Jill, look at your injuries. You won't the legs won't be saved. Do you really want to live like that? Come with me now. And it felt so beautiful, this presentation of an idea of being dead. And as I was contemplating that idea, what I would only call the voice of life piped up, and it was angry, and it was furious, and it was almost yelling at me, saying, how dare you for a single moment entertain not being here? Whether you've got legs, whether you haven't got legs, there is a lot for you to do. And I think in that moment, I instinctively knew my life would be very different. Not about the physical, but about what I'd go on to do with my life.
That voice of life, was that female as well?
No, it was male. Bloody men.
Bloody men always making women work harder, taking the tough option. Jill's legs were ruined. They were replaced by artificial legs. She's moved back to Adelaide and formed an organisation called Mad for Peace, which is all about stopping the cycle of violence. She's an amazing woman. One final thought before I leave, which is my program lies. My program lies all the time, and the lie is embedded in the structure of it. Because every day I present someone's life like a narrative arc, kind of anyway. A narrative arc, the beginning and a middle and an end. That's how we seem to respond to these kinds of stories. That's what we seem to be hardwired to hear stories in that way. But a narrative arc is not an accurate diagram of a life at all. Life is way messier than that. And if you want an accurate diagram, you'd be better off getting a giant bowl of spaghetti bolognese and dropping it from a third-floor window, and that filthy mess on the ground, that's your life diagram right there. That's what life really is. And I've been particularly mindful of that ever since I had James Freud on the program. James Freud, formerly of the Models, a former rock star. James's life was presented like this arc. You know, he was born ambitious young guy, became a rock star, drink and drugs, then gave it all away to be reunited with his family. And that was lovely. That was the narrative arc when James came on the show. But several years later, he took back to the drink, and then he died. And that's not an arc. That's a truer indication of the messiness of life. And I've been trying to be mindful of that in James's story ever since. I try to keep him in mind whenever I'm tempted to find some kind of pleasing resolution to someone's life story, because there is nothing ever gets resolved in life. We know this is true. We're still a sucker for that story, though, aren't we? There's no end to that complexity. And if you want another example of a more elegant life diagram, perhaps it's the old-fashioned Mandelbrot set, if you like. Impossibly complex along its crenellated edges, but still constrained within its surface area, which is the finite boundary of our own mortality. But like I said, there's no end of things to discover along those crenellated edges. And for that, at least, I think we should be thankful. Thank you very much.